Join us and unwind with a good book. Welcome to Relaxing Reads.
Hi, it's Deb in Halifax.
Hi, it's Simone in Vancouver.
Hey, it's Tanya in Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, ladies. Now, in our last podcast, we discussed Midnight from Amy McCulloch. Deb, can you give us a little synopsis on the book?
A once-in-a-lifetime trip to Antarctica to camp beneath the midnight sun becomes a desperate battle for survival against a killer determined to follow their prey to the very ends of the earth. So with 24 hours of daylight, there is nowhere to hide. And Olivia, the main character, has always dreamed about spending a white night on the frigid continent, but never thought she'd have the chance until her high-powered, art-dealing boyfriend, Aaron, decides to stage an exhibition on a luxury expedition, a luxury cruise. And it's kind of like a real-life murder mystery weekend that Olivia really didn't sign up for.
No, she did not. This is the perfect time to finally ask the questions we've been wanting to ask to Amy. Hello, Amy. You have Simone, Tanya, and Deb on the line with you.
Hi,
Hey, everybody.
Hi. My gosh,
Absolutely
you've done it
loved
again.
your. I think
all again.
Yeah, we talked to you about your book Breathless, which was such a ride, and now this book. My goodness.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for having me back. I'm honestly so thrilled to get to talk to you again.
Yeah, we're
Oh, my
really looking
goodness.
forward to it. We were just having our discussion about all the little things in this book. So many great themes, so many characters. So, Deb, I'll have you lead us off with our first question for Amy.
Sure. And we talk about how it is quite the ride, Amy. You have an amazing backdrop with a locked room mystery, the high seas version, with twists that leave you hanging and pausing on the edge of your seat. So how did it all come to be? The location, both the vessel, the destination, and this intensity of a story?
Well, sort of like Breathless, I always tend to draw on kind of the personal experiences that I had. And actually, my trip to Antarctica, which I was lucky enough to visit way back in 2016, that happened all before I sort of kind of changed my whole life around and started mountaineering and going on all these other journeys that I went on. So Antarctica was kind of my entrance way into this kind of adventurous side of my life that I hadn't really explored before. And I had just recently been married, and we decided that we were going to take some time and travel through South America, and it was going to be this incredible kind of once-in-a-lifetime trip. And we were in a hostel in Rio chatting to a bunch of other travelers, and I overheard this couple talking about how they were lucky enough to get a last-minute berth on a ship going to Antarctica. And all of a sudden, I became obsessed. It was the only thing I could think about was, how can I find a way to get to Antarctica? You know, for me, it was a destination I'd never dreamed I could go of. You know, some people talk about it as a once in a lifetime. I never thought I would go to somewhere like Antarctica. It just seemed so, you know, it seemed like it might as well have been another planet. But this kind of window of opportunity opened, and I knew I just had to go for it. So for me, Antarctica kind of represents this real change, this shift in my life. And I knew eventually I was going to return there in story because it is such a remarkable place. But it also was kind of a dark time for me. It was sort of it represented a real turning point because I ended up going to Antarctica on my own. You know, had been traveling with my kind of my new husband, and I was so excited about Antarctica, and he just didn't share that excitement. And it was probably the first time that I kind of looked at him and realized, you know, did I even really know this person, or is this really the person? You know, we'd been together for such a long time, almost 10 years up until that point, but we had kind of left our normal lives behind, and we were on this adventure. And that was sort of when we realized that our paths were just diverging, and Antarctica kind of represented that divergence for me. So it really came at a very sort of, I was traveling to the bottom of the world at kind of one of the lowest points in my life, but I also felt this other sense of kind of this opportunity opening up for me where I thought, actually, this is the direction that I would like my life to go in. And if someone doesn't share that with me, then maybe they're not the right person that I want to spend the rest of my life with.
That's so interesting to hear that. And kudos to you for wanting to continue on that path, because I know sometimes when you are traveling with a partner, you kind of have to decide on what's next together, especially if, say, you're on this adventure backpacking through Europe. So have you always kind of been spontaneous? Like, I think that's the beauty of travel. You might have a plan and then you hear of somebody doing something else and then you pivot your plan. Has that always been something you've done, or was this kind of like the gateway to that?
Yeah, I think I've actually always been a planner, sort of the organizer planner of my kind of partnerships, or in my life. I've always taken that on. And I think this was a bit of an opportunity. You know, I just sort of thought, I'd heard about this opportunity that you could kind of get on a last-minute ship if you happen to be on the area and there was space. And I contacted a company and they said, yes, we've got a place for you if you can get here, you know, the next day or something. So it would have involved changing our plans quite dramatically. So in a way, I kind of understand why someone might be reluctant to kind of change a plan that we've had. But for me, it just felt like such a unique thing to do, and something that was worth kind of throwing everything out of the window for, you know, an adventure worth jumping on. And that was probably quite out of character for me. And so it's sort of not a surprise, really, looking back on it, that caused some conflict in the relationship, because that wasn't in our original plan. You know, that was something that was just thrown at me, and I thought I wanted to grab it by both hands, and he didn't. And you know, in a way, it's sort of like fair enough. And he said, you know, if you really want to do this, you go ahead. I'm going to stay and kind of follow the itinerary we had planned. And we met up again afterwards, and you know, continued the original trip that we had. But in the kind of back of my mind, I was always just thinking, you know, I wish that I was with someone who would take that leap with me. And it did sort of quickly become clear from there that the leaps and the decisions that we wanted to take were so different. And I think when you have an experience like that, it kind of rooted within me, and it also reaffirmed the fact that, you know, I wanted to be on a different life path. I wanted to see the wonders and the beauty of the world that was out there, and you know, I needed someone who wanted to do that with me, or I needed the opportunity to go out there and do those things by myself. And you know, that's always for me where story kind of comes from, is those experiences, and it's kind of extrapolating those what ifs to an even greater extent. You know, I ended up on a ship to Antarctica all by myself. Kind of looking back, there's a scene where my main character, Olivia, who also ends up on a ship to Antarctica by herself, kind of looking back as the world as she knows it is kind of, you know, she's sailing away from that point. And I almost knew when that was happening to me, you know, that was a pivotal moment in my life, and that kind of lodged somewhere. And when I was writing this book, that all kind of unlocked. And obviously her journey unfolded in a completely different way to mine, but the root of that came from a really personal, like deeply personal experience.
Amy, it's Tanya in Edmonton. You know, sometimes you have to put yourself in an entirely different situation to kind of get to the real you, and that is sort of what you're talking about, is that this opportunity came up, you decided to do it, your partner decided not to, and then you found out some things about yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's like, why is it that we have to get into these extreme sort of situations before we actually kind of sit down with ourselves and have that conversation? I mean, you were on a ship, you know, going through this crazy passage, and that all of this stuff kind of came up for you. Yeah. You know,
it's sort of like, I know that we've kind of built this comfort zone around our lives, this routine that we followed. And I do wonder, you know, if we had never kind of made that leap, if, you know, how things would have turned out differently. But it is that kind of shock to the system, that pushing my personal boundaries and getting out of my comfort zone that really made me evaluate the important things in my life. And I think that is sort of like, it was a kind of an awakening moment for me, this trip to Antarctica.
Yeah, it seems like such an amazing experience. And you think about like taking a polar plunge, like the whole time we were reading this, first of all, for me, I was getting so distracted, like in the way that you're talking about these towns and the way everything looks. I had to put the book down and go onto Google and look up, is it Ushuaia? Like, how do you say the name of the town?
Ushuaia.
Ushuaia, yeah. I was looking and I was like, wow. Because you think about the end of the world and going down south, and it's like, oh, it's probably really cold, and do people live there? And then you Google it and you're like, this looks really beautiful. So what is it like experiencing that level of being in the water and being, you know, in that environment? Like, what do people who live there, like, what is that world like?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, as like I said, I had no expectations going to Antarctica. I really didn't have a very clear picture of what I was going to go and experience. And it really did begin the moment we landed. You know, I was coming from Buenos Aires, which is this beautiful, hot, vibrant, you know, city, really multicultural and everything, and blazing hot at that time. Because obviously you have to travel to Antarctica in the summer, because that's the only way the ships can get down there. But obviously you're traveling much farther south. And as soon as I sort of landed in Ushuaia, the whole scenery changed. And it's, you know, coming from Canada, there's almost quite a few similarities. It is that kind of, you know, that mountainous region. You leave the plane and the air just feels fresher, and there's snow on the mountains, and you're surrounded by this incredible body of water, and you know, there are all these sort of wooden shacks, almost Nordic in kind of feel as well. And you kind of realize you're sort of mirror of the north that we know is actually, you know, what it's like down in Ushuaia, in the very kind of bottom reaches of Argentina. And then as you kind of journey out into Antarctica, the continent itself, I had no idea what to expect. And what I didn't realize was how vibrant, how full of life it really was. That was what really shocked me. You know, you maybe hear about penguins or you hear about whales or anything, but and I've done whale watching experiences in other parts of the world and everything like that, but I have never experienced anything like I have in Antarctica. I mean, at one point, we were called out onto the deck of the ship because there had been a whale sighting. And I was expecting kind of to see the flute of a tail or something, you know, maybe scouring the water for a jet from the back of a whale or something like that, you know, some really small experience. There had to have been 100 whales around the boat.
Oh,
Wow. I mean, it was one of the most intensely moving and spectacular experiences of my life. And it was on a scale that it is very, very hard to describe. And I did my best through the book, but it was sort of, it felt like otherworldly in the best possible way. It felt like a whole different kind of environment. And it was so much more than I ever thought that it could be. You know, even when people describe to you the different shades of the ice, and you think, how interesting can ice really be? You know, but when you go there and you see these icebergs and these glaciers, it is truly spectacular. And it's also, because it's so wild and so untouched, there's also a kind of primal, almost, you know, it is scary. You know, I think there's something about icebergs in general. I don't know about you, but obviously, you know, I grew up watching Titanic. You know, that was the seminal movie of my world. So there's something about the word iceberg which really like sets something deep, a fear deep within me. And being obviously on a boat in that environment, and you're not just approaching one iceberg. You know, there are icebergs in the water all around you. You just think, how is this possible? I can't even conceive this. You know, so it's this. It kind of does bring out that awe and that real. You know, both you're not scared of it, but you know, it's magnificent. You know, it kind of blows your mind, and it's kind of too big and wild for you to kind of comprehend. But you kind of, you know, there are a few places I think left in the world that are like that, and Antarctica is truly a special place in that way.
I feel like we've spent so much time just getting to know the beauty of Antarctica, which is a beautiful part of this book. But
I can talk about it for
I know you're making us want to go there. But getting back to just the book itself, is there a reason that you had artists, art collectors as kind of a theme for this book and this murder mystery?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you know, what I really wanted to center around was that kind of, you know, was that kind of man's attempt to kind of try and capture nature and what drives it. You know, I'm always fascinated by the world of art and art auctions. It's something that I've been, you know, it's a whole world that I've been really captivated by, and something that, you know, I've kind of grown up next to, sort of tangentially. My parents are kind of in that kind of retail kind of space, and I sort of have always been fascinated by it. And I think, you know, it's a place where there's a lot of wealth. You know, there's a lot of a big community of people who are you know, there's a whole investment stream to art, a whole strand that has nothing to do with the actual art itself, which is what I find so fascinating. So there's a whole world around it that has nothing to do with the art, but just the value of it or the perceived value of it. And then, of course, there's the art and the artist itself, to whom the art means something so completely different. And so I really wanted to put a character in there who has this real connection to the actual beauty and the power of the actual artwork itself, but also is having to deal with the flip side of it, which is the more kind of harsh financial, very kind of brutal, just pure value side of it, which I think the kind of convergence of that is a really interesting space for me. But also it's something that happens on cruise ships, which I find kind of fascinating. These art auctions, it's one of the places, cruise ships are one of the places where this is happening, and part of that is international waters and the beauty of a captive audience and all of that kind of thing. So that really fascinated me as a kind of unique part of art, the art world that you don't really hear that much about. And there's been a lot of scandal about it as well, which is always interesting for a writer to kind of dive into.
That was one of the things, the art thing really appealed to me, Amy. And I've always been, we're all artists in some, we're artists and how we approach radio, and you are a writer. And I always thought it was heartbreaking how the wealth part of art, collecting art, putting art away in a safe or something, and nobody ever sees it. I mean, I always think about the artist, like the artist is putting out is their thoughts, right, on whatever medium they're doing, and then to have somebody buy it just because they can afford it, and then to put it away so that someday in 10 years it accumulates to this enormous value, and then they sell it. And I always think of art as just, I want art on my walls. I want to feel it. And I think it's such a shame that, sometimes the people who can afford it, not all of them put it away, but a lot of them do put it away because it's just an investment, It's just kind of sad to me.
Commodification of it.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to talk about was, you talked about Olivia and her dad and her mom, and Olivia's dad sailed yachts, to different ports of call because the wealthy owners didn't want to or didn't have time or whatever. Kind of an interesting life. Now, I think I read that your aunt and uncle sailed around the world. Like, did you know somebody who moved yachts from one exotic location to another to kind of base, Pierre and her dad and living that kind of life?
I did. It was my dad's brother, my uncle. He was always kind of this explorer figure in my life that I kind of looked up to. He's 15 years older than my dad, so he was always sort of this kind of enigmatic figure, I suppose. And he was an airline captain for Air Canada for a long time. But when he retired, he sailed yachts. That's what he did. And he did this thing where he would transport yachts from the Mediterranean to the Caribbean and from LA across to the Polynesian islands. And he wrote his memoirs, which were so incredibly fascinating when I got to read them, and detailing his voyages, some of which were ocean crossings that were done solo. And to me that sort of blew my mind that he had put himself through that, and what you have to endure to sail a vessel through an ocean on your own. I just couldn't really conceptualize that. So reading his experiences and then talking to him about it afterwards, he's definitely a huge inspiration for me in my life, and probably my closest sort of explorer spirit in the family, because my parents don't know where I've got it from. Neither of them.
There are also so many great characters in this book. I loved the cabin mates. At first it's like you've got Janine who's sick, and then you got Annalise who's kind of just in her own world, and then you have Patty, who just, takes us for a curve at the end with what happens. But what was kind of your favorite character, or was there one that you really enjoyed writing for, or maybe based loosely on someone you kind of met in your travels?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Patty was definitely great fun to write, because I really wanted to write that character who kind of unifies the group. She kind of is the mother figure almost, who kind of brings everyone together, and is always trying to bring Olivia out of her shell and kind of make sure that they're all looked after. And I did kind of base that, when I ended up on the ship to Antarctica by myself, I was put in a berth with 3 other women that I didn't know, and there was just one sort of larger than life character. And I kind of needed that, I needed someone to say, oh, what are you doing for dinner? Or why don't you come and grab a drink with us? Or let's go and have a look outside. Someone who could bring out that kind of, or who had that extroversion to kind of help me through. And I really appreciated kind of being seen that way. And definitely, so it was fun to write a kind of character who could do a similar thing for Olivia. But it was great. I think for me the greatest character, and I'm putting quotation marks up in my hand to write, is the setting for me. That's always the part that I have the most fun writing. I'm sure that kind of comes across as well. But that's what I always want to do in my books, is kind of create these characters, but put them in these settings that kind of really act as characters themselves and as part of the plot. Antarctica itself kind of challenges Olivia. It puts everything into perspective for her, and it throws a lot at her as well. And so that's why I kind of choose these really extreme places, whether it's the top of a mountain in Nepal or the bottom of the world in Antarctica, or my next book, which is going to be in the Sahara Desert.
Ooh. You are just, wow. Amy, I think we can all agree that you are teaching us a lot. Like, there's a lot to learn in this book, whether it's from the art world, sailing and yachting, and, and something that I think is very much appreciated is mental health, and your main character Olivia is facing a lot of things and the big fears head on, and she had this once in a lifetime opportunity, but also being able to conquer mental health, take that on with family life. There's so much going on, and I think it's greatly appreciated what you throw out into this story.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was really important to me to kind of talk about burnout, especially. That was something that was a really big topic for me when I was writing the book.
Yeah. And Amy, you mentioned that your next one takes place in the Sahara. We were just chatting, and Tanya mentioned that both of the last locations were beautiful, but cold. So this will be a nice way to warm up in that location. Is there any other projects that you're working on that we can look forward to, or can you let us know when the release date of that book will be?
Yes. Well, I think it's going to be out next summer, so not until summer 2025. But that is going to be, at the moment it's tentatively called Runner 13, and it's set on an ultra marathon through the Sahara Desert in Morocco, which is actually something that I did this time in 2022. Yeah, so
you are
I ran
a powerhouse.
Yes, so adventurous. I want to be like you.
So do I.
When we all grow up.
Well, I just kind of throw myself into these slightly insane, extreme experiences. But this was, again, as you say, a completely different environment, from freezing cold to kind of dealing with the heat and the sand, and running 250 kilometers in the kind of world of ultra running, and all the kind of crazy people that you encounter on that sort of adventure as well.
Oh, that's so amazing. We really look forward to reading that. And yeah, we love your work, and it's always so lovely chatting with you. And so thank you for giving us your time. It was an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking with you. Thanks for your
Thank you,
support.
Amy. I look forward to your next book.
Thank you.
Me too. I think I'll live through you and your story and not actually take on the marathon.
Well, that's fine. I'm happy with that too.
Amazing.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Wow. What?
Oh my gosh.
Seriously. All I could go. It's like, what?
I know yesterday I was complaining because I had to get up early for my son's hockey practice. Then I had to come to work all day. Then I had to go home and take the kids to a birthday party. Then I had to get ready because I went to the Madonna concert. And I was exhausted in my own. And I was thinking, well, first of all, wait a minute. I'm not even on stage. Like, here's Madonna, who is 62, and she's going to perform for 3 hours when I have to sit here. And now we talk to Amy, who's just going on these adventures. What reason do I have to be tired?
Because were sitting back having a sip of wine watching all of it.
That's so true. It's like
I am doing something wrong. What? Well, honestly, like you read her books and then you talk to her and like she's doing these things and it's just like the stories that she's going to have to tell. And I think like what makes a person kind of do that, right? Because we all get in our jobs, we all get into this, and we got a book vacation. We got a certain amount of vacation where we certainly can't just go off for 6 months, And it's just like I just wish, wow, she's doing it, It's not for everybody, but I would like a little bit more adventure in my life.
Yes, I think after this, we all will be dreaming of adventure. And I love that. That's why I made that comment, because it seemed like we were so caught up in just talking about the location. I was like, well, we got to talk a little bit about her book, because it's like I could listen to her for hours describing whales around boats or little seals popping up through the water and just the beauty of nature, that pristine nature that we so rarely or ever might get to see in our lifetime. But it was lovely chatting with her.
Yeah, and I think the way that I didn't really think of the location as a character before. And I thought that was really interesting how she said that she makes her locations a primary character. And they didn't, the mountains would have been in the other one and Antarctica and is the main character, one of her favorite characters in this book. And I just got to tell you just a very short story. I know we got to go, but my boyfriend, his dad built a boat, like a sailboat, and he sailed from Vancouver. And my boyfriend was on that trip, and they went to Mexico. And he talked about like sitting on the boat when you have to keep watch, because they talked about Amy wrote about. How Olivia was just traumatized because she thought she didn't keep watch, right? And that's what happened. Her dad died. And he talks about like sitting on the boat in the middle of the ocean, a sailboat, a small sailboat with nothing but blackness around you. And you have to wait, you have to listen and look for lights. I'm like, seriously?
No, thank you.
Never do that. He got off the boat he got off the boat in Mexico and hung out in Mexico for like 6 months. And his dad, though, took on another crew and he went to freaking Australia. And then some of the crews, like some of Greg's friends, like stayed in Australia and they did exactly what these characters, like they sailed yachts. They just crewed up. And wherever they were sailing, they just went, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that.
See, I like,
oh my gosh.
I like that side of it, experiencing sailing, being on the water, but being in the dark, like I can't even make it through a power outage. So I'm not going to be doing well.
Terrified.
Wait, what about my snacks and my drinks? Are we going to be okay?
Yeah, there goes your wine, Deb. Oh, so amazing.
Oh my gosh.
Wine is the main character in our world. That's why we miss out on.
Yeah, I'll celebrate and have a drink for you on this coast.
Exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, we should maybe mention quickly our next book. We are going to be reading The Mystery Guest from Nita Prose. We last read The Maid from her. So another Canadian author. Looking forward to getting into that book as well.
Looking forward to it.
As always, lovely chatting with you both.
You too. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for kicking back and relaxing with us. We hope you'll join us again on Relaxing Reads.